Hello everyone and welcome to this Ukraine update video. Today is going to be an extraordinary video because the situation changed significantly from what we've discussed over the last week. Russia has literally abandoned the plan for the phase 2 of the operations and escalated the situation to basically change to a phase 3 operations. And the correct question here to ask is, how do we know that the phase 2 is over? So we know that around the phase 2, Russia's plan was to take the Luhansk Oblast and to then proceed to take Donetsk Oblast, the parts that were controlled by the Ukraine. With taking of Luhansk, they almost completely succeeded with it and took over the region. And now we were expecting them to continue pushing then towards Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, seize these cities, encircle them and take them over. That was the plan, at least for the Russians. And I've been explaining a lot what was the situation, what was happening over the past week. However, one small detail that I mentioned maybe 2 weeks ago or so was the fact that we saw that after taking of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, that there has been significant forces moved back to the Russian territory, and some of them were even moved back to Crimea to support the southern part of this invasion. And what happened is, over the last week, we've seen attacks mostly around this area here, right, roughly, and we know that there has been some attacks towards Solidar, so somewhere here. And before, Russians were advancing and pushing in this direction and also here. However, we noticed that this activity significantly stopped. And now we know why. So the reason why is that we remember that there was a couple of big groupings of Russians. There was here, 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 here. So those were the big groupings during the phase 2 and how they were pushing. We now know significantly that significant parts, I'm saying significantly so much, significant parts of these groups have now been pulled out and moved back to Russia. So right now there is very limited Russian forces. It's still somewhat significant to hold the line, but it's definitely not enough to be considered an aggressive push. And only the southern part here is still supported, but the southern part is mostly people from the Donbass region forces, plus the mercenaries from the Wagner group. So, and they are fighting on the south side. What does this mean? And we also know that the Russians have been moving south and towards Crimea, and then towards the southern part of Ukraine. And here I explain to you that there are two options where these forces might go. One, if they will go to support Kherson, and second, if they go into the counteroffensive around Zaporizhia. This happened because Ukraine has built really nice momentum around the Kherson region, and basically Russians blinked. Russians basically said that we cannot give away Kherson. This would be devastating. Ukraine has struck the supply lines on the Antonov Bridge, on the bridge around Novakhovka, and the railway bridge has been also hit. Antonov Bridge and the Antonov Railway Bridge are pretty much out of commission. Novakhovka Bridge is technically somewhat out of commission, but there is very small transfer over the water, so there is actually quite a fast pontoon bridge that's been built, and now it's you can say it's operating, but it's still just one path towards this whole region. We also know that Ukraine struck this bridge right here, therefore isolating this whole Kherson and the near Kherson areas from a lot of the Russian supplies. HIMARS systems have also been striking a lot of the supplies here. So the response of the Russians that they gave is say, let's fight it out. They say they basically abandoned the taking of Donbass. There is now pretty much reported by any analyst saying that there is not enough forces, period, to take any major settlement in Donbass region. So not even Bakhmut, despite the breakaway parts, the mercenaries and the Republic forces are still kind of advancing on the south side. It is still extremely slow. And what they want to meet is they want to meet the Ukraine offensive head on, because Ukraine said over the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to advance and retake Kherson. That is our goal. The Ukraine has said it out loud. So Russians decided to move in forces. So over the past week, the last couple of days, there has been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fighting vehicles and supply vehicles that's been moved into this region. And this, by many analysts, is basically saying that Russia is putting themselves into the mousetrap. Why is that? Because this is a political decision. This was not a military decision. The military decision for this war would be then to continue advancing with the concentrated forces that they had in the Donbass. But this is a pure political decision saying, take Kherson, we need to hold it, don't give it to Ukraine, crush the Ukrainians. And this is going to be very challenging for the Russians. A big discussion here was, right, okay, so if the Russians are now massing their presence here, will that mean that they will then just sit in a defense, or will they attack Ukrainians? And to understand that, let's go quickly over the Ukrainian line, over the Ukrainian plan of what the Ukraine wants to do. And I'm not going to show the very precise lines or so on. I'm just going to explain generally. So Ukrainians have declared the offensive. However, we know that Ukrainian army is very sensitive to the manpower losses because they really value the life of their servicemen. So what they are essentially going to be doing is isolating combat areas, and they will be trying to advance slowly but surely by destroying the Russian supply lines with the long-range artillery, by destroying the concentration of forces that Russia will have, and destroying the other key targets, and then kind of slowly moving in kilometer by kilometer. It's not going to be an offensive that you would see, I don't know, in the military movies, or the offensive that we would see in phase 1 of this war, when the Russia was just kind of just throwing all the forces that they had at the enemy and then seeing them devastated. That is not how Ukraine fights. That is not how any analyst says Ukraine will fight. This is more akin to what US is doing when it's fighting. I've read, actually, I took my time, since you know I'm not a military analyst, I'm more of a data analyst to be precise, but I was reading up on the doctrines of the US, and I read up about what this pre-aggression planning is, what is actually aggression, how aggression should be executed. There is a whole manual on this online. I'm pretty sure I'm making a lot of the military people rolling their eyes just because how basic it is, but me as a civilian, I didn't know that in this much detail. But what essentially Ukraine is doing right now is shaping the battlefield. They are preparing the battlefield for their operations. The scale of these operations will be determined by the success of the shaping, but everything that they're doing is actually very, very nice. It's very professional how they're executing it. And a lot of the analysts and military experts are saying that this is going to be a big disaster for the Russians. So Ukrainian plan is destroy the center points, destroy the logistics, cut out the supply lines, and then take on the Russian army piece by piece in this region. Use the long-range artillery and advance. What is the Russian plans? Well, there are two that were discussed by the analysts. One is to just fortify all of the position and hold. So make multi-line defense lines essentially around the area. And then as Ukrainians were going to advance, they will just be hitting the defense lines and then falling back. The problem is this is not how Russians fight. This is not how Russians want to fight. This is what Ukrainians have been fighting for these past two phases, and they've been doing great success because they've been grinding down the Russian army really significantly. But the Russian army, firstly, they don't have a lot of space to fall back to. Secondly, they are stuck on this outpost here. So like once they get pushed out more and more, they're going to have less and less spaces, so their forces will become more and more concentrated, which is, again, when you have an enemy with a precision strike missiles, that's not going to be working that well. So most of the analysts that I've heard are saying that the Russians are moving these massive forces here, And what they want to do is essentially not give a chance Ukraine to slowly shape the battlefield and instead do counteroffensive. And we talked about the counteroffensive around Zaporizhia, which is more to the right side. But it seems because they're moving the forces into this area over the Kakhovska Dam and the like a pontoon bridges or ferries, we know that will probably mean that Russians will mass up troops and they will go on the aggressive. They will try to do preemptive strike on the Ukrainian forces that were aggressive here, and they will try to essentially push them back and inflict damage to the Ukrainian forces. This is, again, quite good for the Ukrainians because this means only one thing, that they will just need to do the same warfare they did before, that they're so used to, fighting the defensive war. Because being aggressive in a war is very much difficult. Like, even if you read that manual, it always states there's a lot of kind of descriptions about this, that state of preparation you need for the aggressive action and so on. So being on defensive is easier, and basically your only reason to be only task on being on defensive is just destroy the coming forces, grind them down, and this is what Ukraine is going to be doing. So if the Russians will come, they will meet the Ukrainian forces fighting the war that they are so used to. What changes is, compared to the Donbass, that this land is very much steppe. It's very open land. So we might expect a lot more tactical, faster maneuvering around this area. So like the vehicles can actually speed up and like move not just along the roads, but also have some kind of encirclement action and so on. So there might be some fascinating combat for those of you who are following some other channels that are covering this situation daily, and especially those that are covering where specific military regiments are going, what kind of battles they're having. So those kind of channels would be really interesting around this part. With covering what Russia wants, so Russia wants to just advance towards Ukraine, crush the advancing forces, then fall back, go back to Donbass, and then take over Donetsk again. That's the Russian plan, at least. It's an extremely complicated plan, and a lot of analysts are saying that Russia just don't have the forces to do that, that it is very much possible that this will be their grave. And that's exactly why I named the video as it is, because if Russian forces here are going to get buried, like the bulk of their advancing army that they have now put in this somewhat a mousetrap where they're essentially backed up by this river, this can pretty much end any kind of possibility of the Russian forces to advance or make any kind of proactive action in this war, period. Just because the losses in manpower and equipment will be just so dire. And Ukraine now is a prime position, because now it's not a 1,000 something front line that they had like around Donbass. It's now a very controlled area. But let's talk about why does winning this part of the war matters for Ukraine. So Ukraine wants to make devastating losses on the Russians. And what I said just now about Russia not being able to execute aggressive actions, that will essentially mean that Ukraine will win this war in military fashion. They will slowly but surely crush any kind of Russian army, because the supply of the equipment for Ukrainians will just keep growing, and Russians will just not have enough firepower to kind of hit back. So it will be just one-sided battle. Secondly, it's a huge moral devastation, because Kherson, up to this point, is basically the only major city that Russians have took. Because while Lysychansk and Severodonetsk were important, they are actually not that big of a deal. They are secondary to the Luhansk area's capital, the Luhansk, essentially. So it was not like a major settlement for the region, right? It's not a regional center. And the same kind of goes for Mariupol, the second big part that they took. While they took Mariupol, unfortunately, it didn't get them so much clout as they were expecting, because the fighting around Mariupol was very, very hard. And at the end, they needed to let the essentially prisoners be taken capture rather than completely destroying everyone. So there was not this bloody satisfaction that the Russian wanted, completely taking Mariupol. And also the city is completely destroyed, right? So it's not been taking over the city. They just took the land where the city was. essentially, with a lot of ruins on top of it. So Kherson was essentially the pinnacle of this campaign. It's saying that this is how we can take the city. We're going to be peaceful. We're going to work with the people. We're going to make them make some kind of a phony referendum, and they will join Russia. By taking Kherson back, Ukrainian army will crush the morale of Russian army. There's going to be so many questions about, does this war even matter? Like, what did we even achieve? What's the point of sending thousands and thousands and thousands of Russian troops to die if we're still losing? And how are we losing to Ukraine at all? So that is Kherson is a major turning point for the Ukrainian army to get motivated and additionally supplied that they can win this war in a military fashion, basically put a complete period mark, and then their support until the end of the war will be rock solid. With the Russian side, they really want to crush Ukrainian offensive here. Why? Because it was hyped up. Ukraine basically gambled a lot. Ukraine has propped their supporters, have propped the world about the fact that they are now going to take Kherson, they're now going to attack Kherson, and there is now a lot of expectation on their shoulders. Moreover, it seems that by the ones that I'm hearing, the meeting notes and so on, it seems that what was sold is saying, hey, give us weapons right now as much as you can, and we're going to show you we can win. Basically, it's a test, right? If before it was kind of like preparation, learning, and so on, right now it's a test. Can Ukraine actually attack? If Ukraine will be crushed during this phase, and they will not have any more capabilities, if they lose all their reserves that they've gathered up to make this assault, technically they will still be able to advance later on, but it's going to happen maybe during winter or after winter, and it's going to be just a prolonged conflict. And then we can get the chances that the Russians basically will keep what they have occupied so far. Then it will be something like Minsk 3 or some stuff like that. So for Russians, it's very important to crush the Ukrainian offensive here, because this can basically benefit their plan on freezing this conflict and then moving along. That is the gamble. Russians lose, bad. Ukrainians lose, we're probably going to get a frozen conflict. So what's the situation on the ground? Well, we know that Ukrainians have gathered up a lot around this region, and we know that they're going to be moving slowly to attack. But what they also can do is maybe attack on other angles. Maybe Ukrainians will attack around Zaporizhia if the Russians will concentrate around this part. Maybe they will just continue moving in Donbass, and we already see some of that. For example, around this region, we know that the Izium direction, this was the major force of attack here, the biggest grouping here. And they were having trouble advancing so hard on this direction. They were basically this village and this village, they've been like for this whole phase 2, they didn't advance even past them. But we've seen in the last day, as the forces of Russians have been moving out, Ukrainians actually did a huge pincer move, and it's been now shown here. They took over Bogorodichne, kicked the Russian forces out, and actually advanced very, very far up the river. And that's already kind of showing. So what might happen is that while the Russians will be attacking and Ukrainian defending around Kherson, Ukrainians might even push the Russians back, maybe retake Izium, maybe even siege and come back to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. That would be devastating as well for the Russians. That would be also kind of, what are you doing? But I'm speculating here. So we'll have to see and get our perspective as we go along. But I want everyone to understand that this will change everything. And if you want to know more about how we got to this situation, I've made a tandem video to this one that explains the phase 1 and phase 2 of the war in Ukraine. So please be sure to watch it. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in a couple of days when I'll give you a new update on the phase 3 and as it develops.